Hello, now we are going to look at a method for sharpening our knives. Whenever we want to use our knives for any reason, we make sure we have our first aid kit out and with us. We have our trained first aider whose training is in date and everybody knows who that first aider is. And immediately before we take out our knives, we check our blood circle is clear. The area and arm span around and behind us is completely clear of anyone. Now we are going to look at one of the ways that we can sharpen our knives. When I want to sharpen my knife, I make sure I have my first aid kit out and with me. I have my diamond stone set to the finest grit, in this case 600 grit, and I'm going to keep it wet with water as I work. I want to take my knife out of my sheath, so I'm going to check my blood circle is clear. And when I want to bring the knife down to the stone, I'm going to put the sides of my index fingernails sitting in the middle of the bevel. So on my dominant hand, the knife hand, I'm going to have the side of the index fingernail sitting in the middle of the bevel near the handle. And then my non-dominant hand's index fingernail sits in the middle of the bevel near the belly. I'm just going to sharpen the straight part of the knife to begin with. And then the non-dominant hand's thumb is going to sit on the spine of the knife to try and keep that index fingernail up here from sliding around. So I have that pinched in place. I'm now going to bring the side of the knife, the dark part of the knife, down onto the stone, and then I'm going to press with my sides of my index fingernails to rotate down onto the bevel. I am not pushing with my knife hand. I'm not holding the handle and pushing the knife forward. I'm pressing down on the bevel, on the top side of the bevel, using the sides of my index fingernails, and that is what brings the bevel flat down to the stone, not trying to rotate with my dominant hand. I also want to keep the knife at a little bit of a diagonal to the stone to stop myself from scooping as I'm pushing away from myself. And what I want to do is go side to the bevel, pressing down with the sides of my index fingers, and then I'm going to gently press away from myself, and I want to feel what I'm doing. I'm starting on the 600 grit because I want to be able to feel exactly what's happening between the bevel of the knife and the stone. I should be able to feel the slight undulation in the surface of that sharpening stone as I'm pressing away. If I can't feel that bevel dead flat to the stone as I am working, and if I can't feel what's happening on the surface of that stone and on that bevel as I'm working, then I can't reliably keep the angle correct. So to begin with, we're starting on the lightest grip we've got, so it grips the knife the least, so I can feel what I'm doing more easily. And when I've gotten my muscle memory in, when I can feel exactly what I'm doing, then I'd go to a heavier grit in order to remove the material more efficiently. I want to make sure as I'm sharpening that I do the same number of strokes on both sides of my bevel. I want to keep the cutting edge right in the middle of my knife, and that means I need to do the same number of strokes going on this side of the bevel as I do going on the opposite side of the bevel, where we're going to have the sides of our thumbnails on, and we're going to pull back towards ourselves like this. So 10 strokes going one way and then 10 strokes going the other way keeps the edge in the middle where I want it. And now we are going to look at that in more detail. The side of the knife comes down onto the stone. With the sides of my index fingernails, I can push the bevel down until it is flat. I have the knife sitting at an angle to the stone, and then I can gently push away. For coming in the other direction, I'm going to bring the side of the knife down onto the stone. I'm going to have my knife sitting at a bit of an angle to the stone, and this time I have the sides of my thumbnails sitting in the middle of the bevel, and I have the top thumbnail up near the beginning of the belly, near where it curves, and my index fingernail sitting on the spine of the knife to stop this hand slipping forward. So onto the side, press down with my thumbnails, the side of my thumbnail, so that I rotate the bevel down onto the stone. I am not rotating with my knife hand, I'm pressing down with the thumbnails, and that is what gives me the rotation. Now when that is flat to the stone, I can pull gently across, and again all I am doing is feeling that bevel is flat to the surface. I should be able to feel the slight up and down in the surface of this stone, up through the sides of my fingernails, up through the sides of my thumbnails, and until I can feel that flat, solid feeling on the stone, I can't hold that angle reliably. So that's what I'm focused on. And now we're going to look at that in more detail. I bring the side of the knife down, and with the sides of my thumbnail in the middle of the bevel, I can press down with the sides of my thumbnail, and this makes the knife rotate around so that the bevel sits flat to the stone. I can then move the knife diagonally across the stone, so it is not facing side to side, it's on a diagonal, so that I minimize the chances of scooping with the knife as I go. When we want to sharpen from the belly out to the tip, we're going to hold the sides of our index fingernails so that the side of our index finger is sitting at the beginning of the belly, and then as close to the tip as we can comfortably hold. And the back of my thumb is pinching at the side of at the back of the spine, so that my finger here doesn't slip forward. I have my fingers here overhanging the edge, as so. I want to keep them out away from the cutting edge so I don't get cut. And I'm going to, as before, come down on the side of the knife, press with the sides of the index fingernails to rotate down to the bevel. I can now feel that that's solid on the stone, so I don't need to go any further. And I gently push away from myself and come around in an arc. And as I'm coming around, I have to raise this hand slightly so that that bevel stays flat to the stone as I'm coming around. So side, press down on the bevel to rotate down to the bevel, then rotate around and raise this hand slightly. And now we're going to look at that in more detail. The side of the knife comes down to the stone. I have my index fingernails sitting on the middle of the bevel, and I rotate the knife by pressing down with my side of my index fingernail so that I feel that that bevel is now flat to the stone. I then move the knife gently across the stone, and I have to raise this hand slightly, the knife hand slightly, as I am coming around to the tip. So side to the bevel, coming around in an arc and raising this hand slightly in order to keep the bevel flat here. Because if I don't raise my hand, the knife will not sit flat to the stone when I get to the tip, because I am moving further away from my point of contact, so I need to keep the angle the same by raising this hand slightly. So come down on the side, rotate to the bevel by pressing down with the sides of my index fingernails and rotating around. And as I come around toward the tip and the distance from my holding point is getting longer, I'm going to have to raise this hand ever so slightly in order to keep the bevel in contact down here as I come around toward the tip. When we want to come back in the other direction, we're going to come down on the side of the knife. As always, the sides of our thumbnails are going to sit up. One of the knife hand thumb is going to sit at the beginning of the belly, in the middle of the bevel. The other hand is going to sit as far up as possible, so the middle of the thumbnail sits as close to the tip as possible, and my index finger sits against the spine to stop that hand sliding forward as I work. So I'm now on the side of the knife. I press with the sides of my thumbnails to rotate down onto the bevel, and I'm going to come around in a curve, and I'm raising this hand slightly as I come around to keep the bevel flat to the stone as I'm coming around toward the tip. So flat to the bevel, coming around, raising the hand slightly as I come toward the tip to keep the bevel flat. And now we will look at that in more detail. The side of the knife comes down onto the stone, and then with the sides of my thumbnails sitting in the middle of the bevel, I can press down, and by pressing down with the side of the thumbnail, I rotate the knife so that the bevel now sits flat to the stone. I can then move around in a curve, and as I move around, the knife hand needs to move upward slightly in order to keep the tip of the knife in contact with the stone. I can see at the moment the tip of the knife is sitting above the stone,
If I raise my hand slightly, it comes down in contact with the stone. So as we come around in our curve, we have to raise this hand by a small amount to keep the bevel in contact with the stone as we go around, because our point of contact is getting further away as we come around the curve. So flat to the bevel by pressing down with the sides of our thumbnails, then coming around in a curve and raising this hand slightly, the knife hand slightly, to keep the bevel in contact as we come around toward the tip.
When we have developed our muscle memory and we've gotten our hands into feeling that the bevel is flat onto the stone all the time, then we need to start really grinding off metal. So we were on 600 grit, we would switch the stone to 300 grit or 200 grit, depending on how much damage there was. And we would continue to sharpen 10 strokes on one side, 10 strokes on the other, doing the straight part and the belly, until we ground the edge down to the point where we started to see a wire edge, a burr, going all the way across the edge. And at that point we knew the edge was thin enough that it was starting to bend out of the way as we were trying to sharpen it, and that would tell us it was thin enough to make a really good cutting edge when we polished it smooth. So we'd do all of that work on a heavy grit, like 300 grit, doing the same number of strokes on both sides of the bevel. Then we would, when we have that burr all the way along the edge, we would switch to 400 grit and then 600 grit, keeping the surface wet the whole time, so that we would polish off all of the grooves from those heavier diamonds, making big scratches in the surface. And we would go back up to 600 grit so that we would create a nice smooth surface to work with. But as we're doing all of that sharpening work, we want to have those scratches going all the way across from one side of the bevel to the other. So I want to take out my knife, I'm going to check my blood circle, and I would normally be sharpening going all the way from going on the diagonal, and I want those scratches that I'm creating going all the way from the cutting edge to the back of the bevel. Well, after I've been sharpening for a little while, how can I see that I'm still doing that? Because there's already scratches there. So what I can do is hold the bevel, hold the knife as normal, but hold it straight across the stone and just do a few strokes where I just gently pull side to side instead of going at a diagonal. I'm not trying to really remove material here. What I'm trying to do is create a different scratch pattern. Now, instead of the scratches going on a diagonal all the way from the cutting edge to the back, they're running along the cutting edge. And that's useful because now when I go back and sharpen as normal, I now can see whether I'm still going all the way across my bevel. Am I getting scratches that start at the cutting edge, go all the way across? And I've reset that surface by having those scratches going along the cutting edge, so I can see if I'm still getting my scratches where I need them to be. And now we are going to look at how to strop our knives. When we want to strop our knives, when we are finished sharpening, we're going to make sure that there is buffing compound on this to make the strop work more effectively. We just rub that into the surface and then we can get to our stropping. So check blood circle and take out the knife. I have my handle back here, and I have this long section here that I can use to clean the edge of my knife so I can see what I'm doing more effectively at the end or before I start sharpening in order to check if the knife is damaged. And all I'm going to do is put the knife backwards across the strop. I can't push the knife into the strop because it will cut the surface. So instead I have to drag the knife backwards. So the side of my thumb sits in the middle of the bevel, and I bring it to the bevel and push away from myself all the way out to the tip. I can do all of this in one go. So side to the bevel and go out 10 times away from myself, and then once I'd done 10 times I would flip over and put the index finger in the middle of the bevel, and I would go side to the bevel and pull back up toward the tip. And I would do that an equal number of times, say 10 times going back the other way, always keeping the number of strokes equal on both sides. And that is how we can sharpen our knives and how we can strop our knives. And that is what we need for now.